Hello there, this is Teresa Matsura, and you're listening to Uncanny Japan. Here we are on the fourth and final installment of our listeners' true spooky stories, and it's another Outside-a-Palooza. From next episode, we'll be business as usual with something new I have up my sleeve. But today, we have more what the and eye-raising tales to hear. Would you like to explore the stranger, more obscure corners of Japanese culture? Dig a little deeper into superstitions, curious customs, and all those mysterious creatures that inhabit the land? If so, then this is the podcast for you. Uncanny Japan is where I, author Teresa Matsura, share all the fascinating tidbits I unearth while doing research for my writing. From the bizarre to the ghastly, and everything in between. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome back. I hope everyone's doing well. I'm very fine, thank you, except for the humidity. We are in full rainy season in Japan. Are you ready to get into today's stories? Yeah, me too. You'll remember Kate. Her story about the ghostly land and the oharai was the first one I read in our little series. I also told you that she was really interesting and had a lot of cool experiences. And I was right. Here's another true experience from her, and it's called On Pilgrimage. Kate's story. I have undertaken the Saikoku Kannon pilgrimage many times, and I am the only foreigner designated as an official pilgrimage guide, sendatsu. These sacred places have been visited by pilgrims for over 1,000 years and were probably established on sites that were sacred before that. When entering the precincts of many of these ancient sites, it feels as though you are quite literally stepping through the misty veil into a liminal space that is beyond here and now, yet somehow even more luminously real. The sensation has been experienced by many fellow pilgrims who I have escorted on pilgrimage, foreigners who are not necessarily interested in Buddhism, but are engaging in an interesting journey into the hinterlands of Japan, participating in a living ancient tradition. Yet, within that liminal space, pilgrims will always experience many emotions and sensations that they cannot explain and which will bring awe, wonderment, puzzled skepticism, and sometimes very real fear of the unknown. I want to share, however, one particular day when I was on pilgrimage by myself and visited Ichijoji, a temple not far from Himeji City in Hyogo Prefecture. It was a warm day in September, yet as I walked up the long stairway toward the main temple, I felt a chill run through me that made me shiver. After visiting the main temple, I proceeded on up the pathway to explore the mountain behind and take the pathway to the Oku-no-in, the innermost sacred precinct of the temple, first passing many ancient statues, their faces' features blurred with time and covered in moss. The pathway gradually became narrower, with wild vines and weeds crossing my path, and the temperature continued to drop as I entered further into the dense bamboo forest. After some time, I came to an open space in the midst of the bamboo grove, and there was a small wayside shrine, like you see everywhere in Japanese neighborhoods and by the side of the road. Curiously, there was a clock hanging at the apex of the roof, an ordinary, round, simple plastic clock. The kind that might hang in any kitchen anywhere in the world. The hands of the clock read 2 o'clock. I checked my own watch and was surprised to see that it was indeed exactly 2 o'clock. How strange, I thought, that someone comes all the way up here with fresh batteries to keep the clock on time. Oddly, beside the little shrine was a modern statue of a young girl in a light dress poised as if dancing, with a necklace of beads around her neck. It was unnaturally still, dark and quiet in the forest. No birds, no wind. I continued on up the mountain, when suddenly, there, lying across the pathway before me, was a white snake, not moving, and I wondered if it was dead. But as I approached, it raised up and turned its head toward me. I have never seen a white snake in Japan, and I knew from my reading that white snakes are considered a sacred emanation of Kannon. So I was more curious than afraid. But the snake then slowly moved off into the thick bamboo grove. At last I arrived at the Okunoin, which at Ichijoji is named Sai no Kawara. It is a cave in the mountainside, with rocks and stones strewn all around and water trickling throughout. It is a clammy, cold, dark, and dank place, filled with a palpable sense of grief. Sai no Kawara is the shore of the river that divides this world from paradise. It is in this limbo that the spirits of dead children gather, and where they are forced by demons to build up piles of stones to make their own causeway to the other side. But every night an old hag demon comes along and knocks down those stones. So the children have to start all over again, but soon they are rescued by the compassionate Bodhisattva Jizo, who comes and gathers up the children in the folds of his robes and carries them across the river to the pure land on the other side. Here at Sai no Kawara, I can see many cairns of small stones that have been placed here and there by grieving parents wanting to help the spirits of their lost children. There are also children's toys and candy strewn among the wet rocks. At the top of the pathway, near the cave entrance, I see a solitary woman seated on a rock, silently weeping with her head in her hands and her long black hair covering her face and her shoulders, which were shaking with her sobbing. I feel very uncomfortable, and I wonder if my presence is imposing on her grief, and consider turning and walking back down the mountain. But I too want to make an offering here, and I have brought incense to light. So I slowly make my way up the slippery, rocky path, stepping very carefully so that I don't slip on the mossy, wet stones, and struggling to keep my balance, holding the rope strung along the path for support. When I get to the entrance of the cave, I glance over at the woman, but there is no one there. I look all around and back down along the rocky path, but there is no one there. The rock where she was sitting is wet, but there is no sign at all that anyone was there. There is only me in this haunted place of grief. I felt quite bewildered, and I had an odd sense of disorientation and dizziness. But I had come this far, and I still wanted to make an offering, so I lit incense and I recited the mantras to Jizo and Kannon, and also made a little cairn of stones on the rock as a kind of bearing witness to the woman's grief. I realized then that I was shaking with intense cold, and I really wanted to just get away from here. I returned along the pathway back down the mountain, feeling with each step that I was returning to the comfort and surety of the mundane world. When I reached the clearing with the statue and the little shrine, I looked again at the clock, which still read 2:00. I checked my watch, but it was now 20 minutes to 3. The clock was not ticking after all. When I arrived back at the entrance gate to the temple grounds, the air was warm and a balmy breeze was blowing, gently tinkling the bells on a carousel hung with offerings of stuffed toys and pinwheels left by grieving parents for the spirits of their lost children. And I continued my pilgrimage along the road, walking perhaps a little more hastily than usual, away from this uncanny sacred place. The end. Wow, right? I'll just let that one sit with you for a second. Mm-hmm. Let's continue down this path as it gets a bit darker and stops at a river here in Shizuoka somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where because this is a story my brother-in-law told me a long time ago, and it stuck with me. It's very short, actually. There was a swimming spot in this river where people would occasionally drown. There was nothing particularly dangerous about this spot. It wasn't like there was a fast-running current underneath or anything. It was actually a little inlet with trees hanging over it. Very idyllic and calm. Although it was a little deep. The drownings happened often enough that a sign was put up not to swim there. Cue one hot summer day when a group of boys decided they wanted to cool off in the river. They saw the sign, but they didn't believe a pool of basically standing water could cause someone to drown. They were all strong swimmers. So they jumped in and began splashing around, horseplaying, as boys do, when one of them felt something touch his leg, kind of grab on and then let go. He thought it was one of his friends joking around, but they were all accounted for, splashing around or on the shore. No one was under the water. He got out immediately and told them what happened. They thought he was kidding them because of the sign and all. It would have been a nice, scary trick, but it wasn't. One of the braver boys put on some goggles and he swam down to the bottom of the little pool area to see what was there. So what did he find? There was some kind of round grate, like a sewer grate made up of heavy iron rods. Only it wasn't securely settled. It looked as if it had been pushed partway off of whatever dark abyss lay below. He returned to his friends, and they freaked out, and they never swam there again. The end. I have questions about that story too, but that's all he knows. I think he heard it from his friends. So there's no way that I can verify any of that. But I do think it makes a good seed for an urban legend, perhaps. And I'm not kidding when I say you'll very often come across signs near rivers with depictions of kappa on them, warning people not to swim there or to be careful when they do swim there. Remember, kappa live in water, and they find it quite entertaining to pull swimmers and even livestock under the surface and drown them. Next. Since we're talking about water, let's go to the beach. I have recently learned about a fellow expat originally from England who now lives in Kyoto. His name is Philip Jackson, and he's super nice, and he contacted me to share a book he'd written called Paranormal Kansai, which, as it turns out, is right up our alley. It's literally a book about all sorts of ghostly and mysterious occurrences in the Kansai area, along with the historical significance to each one. I asked Philip if there was any story in particular that stood out to him, and he chose the one I'm going to tell you about right now. This is mostly Philip's research from his book, with a few details that I added from a newspaper article that I found online about the incident in question. I agree with Philip. This is terrifying, and while it's not a personal experience to him, or of course me, the nightmare happened in front of a lot of witnesses. It also happens to be the deadliest water accident to occur in Japan to date. It happened on Nakagawara Beach in Mie Prefecture, July 28, 1955. This was exactly 10 years after the war, and students used to practice swimming in the ocean, not in the pool like they do now. That particular day was the last day of a 10-day-long swimming training session. It was their test day. The conditions were perfect. The weather was fine, no wind, waves were very light, and the tides weren't doing anything funny. Even the water the kids would be swimming in was only 1 meter deep. Deep enough to swim, but shallow enough to stand up if they needed to. Altogether, about 400 junior high school students, boys and girls, and 19 teachers participated on this day. The test started at 10 a.m. when upward of 100 students entered the water. The accident occurred a few minutes later. It said almost immediately one of the teachers noticed a white line moving toward the shore from far out in the ocean. It looked almost like a small wave, but it disappeared before reaching the swimmers, so nothing was made of it. But that's when, suddenly, those in the water started having problems staying above the surface. Dozens of young girls began calling and shouting for help as they were swept under or pulled under the water. Teachers and stronger swimmers went to help, but in the end, in an instant, 36 girls died that day or in the hospital later. So many that there weren't enough crematoriums in the area and they had to look to nearby cities to help. And that's not even the weirdest or the scariest part of the story. It gets weirder. It said that one of the terrified swimmers was holding a white bullseye zukin when she was pulled ashore. Now, a bullseye zukin looks like and can be used as a cushion, but if there's an emergency, say an earthquake, you can open it and wear it as a thick padded hood that somewhat protects your head and shoulders from falling debris. Of course, these were also used during the war when air raids were common. So why was this girl holding one? No one had brought theirs to the beach for a swimming test. Why would you? Later, one of the girls who survived the incident said that she saw a black clump moving toward the shore. The black clump, it turns out, was a group of women soaking wet wearing bullseye zukin. No one could find any reasonable explanation for the mass drowning. However, sometime later when students who had survived began to speak up, another one of the survivors said that she had swam out to the designated area for the test, but while there her friend pointed to a line of people, the black clump, farther out to sea, all wearing the same bullseye zukin and moving toward them. When these ghostly apparitions got close, they disappeared under the surface. Very soon after, panic began when the swimmers felt hands grabbing their legs and pulling them forcefully underwater. Another survivor said she saw an expressionless white face before she was rescued. And a different survivor said this in a magazine interview after she recovered from the shock of the experience. In Japanese, 海の底からたくさんの女の人が引っ張りに来た. From the depths of the ocean, many female hands came to pull us under. More and more of the students who had survived the episode began to come forward with similar stories. And if you think that isn't frightening enough, here comes the part where your skin really goes cold. As it turns out, during the war, over thousands were killed in the city of Tsu, Mie. It was during an American air raid conducted that ended on July 28th. That's the same date as the mass drowning. All those people had died 10 years prior, on the exact same day. During the war, so many people had died and the crematorium had been destroyed that the bodies were taken to the ocean and buried there. To this day, that beach is a no-swimming zone. I'll put a link to Philip's book and the articles I read in the show notes for anyone who's interested. Phew! Okay, for our final story today, I'll lighten up a little bit. This sent-in tale got me really excited. Our listener and patron Joanna passed it along with permission from her friend, whom we'll call S, for us to retell here. I'm going to preface this with a mention of the Nurikabe. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this funky Japanese yokai. I first learned about him from the anime Gegege no Kitaro, and was like and have always been, what? It's basically a big wall, sometimes with a face or just two wide-set eyes, sometimes invisible. Whatever it looks like, its MO is to suddenly appear in front of you when you're walking at night. Its sole mission is to impede you or misdirect you. Some say it's a trick of a tanuki, and sometimes it's called a tanuki no kabe, I just learned that the reason Mizuki Shigeru included it in his Gegege no Kitaro world is because he actually encountered one in New Guinea. So there's one real-life meeting of this large yokai. But let me read you what Joanna wrote about her friend S. S was working as an English language teacher in Japan in the 1990s. In the summer vacation, she and a friend, another foreigner, went camping in the Japan Alps. I thought it was Gifu Prefecture, but she can't exactly remember where it was. She thinks she could find it on a map, though. One evening, the two of them went for a walk up a mountain track. When dusk began to fall, they realized they didn't have torches with them, and it would be difficult to navigate the path in the dark, so they turned around and began to hurry back toward the campsite. Turning a corner, they slammed to a halt at the exact time when they both saw what they thought was a huge boulder blocking the path. They edged forward, trying to figure out how they were going to get back to their tent, but there was nothing there. They managed to navigate the rest of the way safely, but neither could explain what had happened on the mountain track. I find this story hugely intriguing. Someone in the British Isles might be primed to interpret, for example, a log floating in Loch Ness as a monster because of all the Nessie tales we hear growing up. But although it's not impossible, it seems unlikely that S and her friend would have come across the Nurikabe folktales. Her friend was only visiting for a few weeks and had no prior knowledge of Japanese culture as far as I know. So it can't have been that they were seeing what they expected to see. It's especially weird that they both reacted to the phenomenon at the same time. Was it a trick of the light or the dark? Or was it really something supernatural? It's all very mysterious. The end. I'm not sure why that story makes me so giddy, but it does. I want to hear more Nurikabe tales, because it's one of the few yokai I just can't understand, but I get an absolute hoot out of. So with that, I'll wrap up our Listeners' True Ghostly Tales segment. We've made it to and have passed 100 episodes. And now I'm aiming for the next 100. I still have a long list and loads to talk about, so otanashimi ni shite kudasai. Thanks everyone so much for writing in and sharing your experiences. It's been a blast, and it sounds like everyone's enjoyed them very much. Everyone stay well and stay safe. I will talk to you again in 2 weeks. Bye-bye. You've reached the end of the show, and I just want you to know how much we appreciate you listening and supporting us. Any subscribing, reviewing, and gushing to your friends, family, even random strangers really does help keep us going. If you have the means and you want to help a little more and get a little more, we are making extra content over on Patreon, all for only $5 a month. Or, if you like to read horror, you might be interested in my Bram Stoker-nominated short story collection, The Carp-Faced Boy and Other Tales. Hontoni arigatou gozaimasu. Thank you again, and I'll talk to you real soon.